Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today, we're looking at JP Morgan and his giant knobbly purple nose. John J.P. Morgan is a name synonymous with business, a man who was so respected and influential in the spheres of business and finance that the appearance of the guy on the Monopoly board, rich Uncle Pennybags, is thought to have been based on him. But rather than talk about how Morgan accumulated his truly vast amount of wealth, how he was such a powerful force in the world of finance that he once rescued the United States government from bankruptcy in 1893, or that time in 1907 when he managed to stop the Wall Street panic of 1907, which might have otherwise plunged the US into a depression, and the result of which inspired the creation of the Federal Reserve System for when someone like JP Morgan wasn't around to fix the situation, or that time he financed Thomas Edison in the invention of a commercially viable light bulb and helped form General Electric, or any of the other of his countless history-changing business conquests. No, we're going to talk about something much less well known about this admiral of industry, his giant nose. Now, given the list of accomplishments attributed to Morgan and the ridiculous amount of power he wielded during his lifetime, to the point that the President of the United States was called his lapdog, and nicknames in the finance industry for the man included Zeus and Jupiter, it may seem a little odd that we would want to talk about his nose. So let's explain. Morgan didn't just have a bulbous nose, it was also purplish red because of a skin condition he suffered from as a child known as rosacea. This causes the blood vessels in the face to dilate and rupture. Morgan also suffered from rhinophyma, which is a common side effect of rosacea, resulting in numerous growths, lesions, and fissures marking the surface of his nose. But here's the thing, almost nobody in America during Morgan's lifetime was aware of any of this. Impressive considering he was one of the most famous business magnates in the world for not an insignificant portion of his life. Morgan was largely able to avoid having the general public know about his condition by being absolutely terrifying both in private and public. Standing at an intimidating 6 foot 2 inches tall, the average male height in the US at the time was 5 foot 7 inches or 170 centimeters, and in Europe 5 foot 5 inches or 165 centimeters, with massive shoulders and piercing eyes some have likened to those of a magpie. Few people dared approach Morgan in public, and fewer still dared to do so with a camera. Out of fear, Morgan would quite literally attempt to beat them half to death in the street. This may sound like hyperbole, but Morgan was known to violently lash out at anyone who attempted to take his photo without his permission, so much so that one of the few unofficial pictures we have of him actually shows him in the middle of swinging his walking stick at the cameraman's face. While conducting business, Morgan was decidedly less violent, but was still feared by those who had to deal with him due to his infamously short temper. Morgan hated long meetings and would often seemingly make snap judgments about business deals and people, sometimes throwing the latter out of his office mere seconds after meeting them. This habit earned Morgan the nickname Yes or No Morgan amongst his peers. Though many assume this was simply a result of Morgan's temper, behind the scenes he had staff meticulously research anyone who wished to meet with him and what exactly they were going to be presenting him, so that by the time they shook hands he already knew a lot about them and had made himself an expert on whatever venture they would be proposing. Thus he was really just looking to size the individual up in person before agreeing to some deal or tossing them out. Supposedly, Morgan started doing this as a result of a shady business deal he financed during the American Civil War that came to be known as the Hall Carbine Affair, the unscrupulous nature of which Morgan purportedly had been ignorant of. He had simply lent one Simon Stevens the $20,000, a little over $500,000 today, to move forward with the scheme. Speaking of the Civil War, Morgan himself never took part, having paid a substitute to take his place. The cost, about $300, which is about $9,000 today, or roughly the same amount of money Morgan spent on a single order of cigars, which he smoked dozens of every day. Outside of countless extramarital affairs, his first wife, Amelia "Mimi" Sturgis, the only woman he ever loved, died of tuberculosis within 4 months of their marriage. His second, Frances Louisa Tracy, he wasn't so loyal to. Morgan was known as a man of impeccable moral integrity as a result of his deeply religious beliefs. He was also famous for his hands-on approach to business, often insisting on personally meeting with anyone who wished to deal in any significant way with any of his many business holdings. In these meetings, Morgan would use his towering frame and reputation to squarely address prospective business partners, making unflinching eye contact the entire time. A refusal to hold his gaze was seen as weakness by Morgan, and meetings where a person failed to shake his hand in a satisfactory manner rarely lasted long. Alright, so back to the way he looked. Morgan intensely disliked having his portrait painted due to both his self-consciousness about his nose, something he required to be touched up in all photographs and paintings to appear more normal, as well as the fact that he simply didn't like sitting still and doing nothing. As a result, portrait painters often used a picture of Morgan he would intensely scrutinize beforehand. A notable example of this occurred in 1903 when an artist called Fedor Enck hired a young photographer by the name of Edward Steichen to take a picture of the business titan to help him complete a portrait he had been commissioned to create. Steichen spent hours perfecting the lighting for the resulting shoot, using a janitor with a similar build to the tycoon himself to sit in for Morgan, who himself agreed to turn up for only a grand total of 5 minutes. The eventual shoot lasted only 3 minutes, the efficiency of which inspired Morgan to exclaim to Steichen, "I like you, young man." According to Steichen, Morgan turned up to the shoot and, without saying a word, sat in the chair positioned in the middle of the room and struck a dignified pose. Steichen obliged and took a photo before saying something that would define his later career. "Would you mind moving your head?" Morgan answered the question with a withering glare that Steichen managed to quickly capture with a second photo before Morgan could change his expression. Morgan then stood up, paid Steichen $500, about $13,000 today, and after a brief exchange left. Knowing Morgan's sensitivity about his nose, Steichen touched up the two photos as best he could to make the protuberance look more normal. He then took the photos to Morgan to show him the result. Morgan loved the first, ordering a dozen copies and ordering that Fedor Enck use it as the basis for the aforementioned portrait. The second photo, however, was much closer to the stereotypical idea of J.P. Morgan, the ruthless robber baron. In fact, whereas the first photo showed Morgan as a dignified businessman, the second literally made him look like he was about to stab someone. You see, beyond his stern expression, it looked like he was holding a knife in his hand thanks to a quirk of the lighting which made the arm of the chair Morgan was holding look like a small dagger. Morgan hated the photo and tore up the first copy he saw on the spot before throwing Steichen out of his office. Perhaps in an attempt to make sure the photo never saw the light of day, Morgan offered the photographer $5,000, $130,000 today, for the original print, which he never sold, as a way of annoying the banking behemoth for being so rude to him. When Morgan eventually requested copies of that second photo, Steichen agreed to send them over, but delayed doing so for 3 full years. As he said, "This was my rather childish way of getting even with him for tearing up that first proof." In the end, Morgan died with virtually nobody outside of his circle of friends and those he did face-to-face business with knowing how he truly looked, and it took years for actual, untouched photos of the man to see the light of day. He had so tightly controlled his image. Beyond controlling how people saw him visually, unfortunately for those of us who love history, Morgan's love of privacy also inspired him to, shortly before his death, burn thousands of letters he wrote, including just over 30 years worth of weekly letters to his father in England concerning the state of business and politics in the United States starting in the 1850s. Letters which would have otherwise been a veritable treasure trove of first-hand accounts and insights on business and politics in the United States from one of the greatest businessmen in history. And now for a bonus fact. When parcel post service first launched in America on January 1st, 1913, there were few guidelines on what could be mailed. As a result, a handful of parents, spotting a bargain, began mailing their children. The first known case of this was the child of Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Boge of Ohio, only a few weeks after the launch of Parcel Post. They sent their son to his grandmother's house for a fee of just 15 cents, or about $3.72 today. On January 27th, 1913, Mr. and Mrs. J.W. Savis of Pennsylvania mailed their daughter to relatives for a fee of 45 cents. More famously, 5-year-old May Piersdorf of Idaho was mailed on February 19th, 1914, 73 miles to her grandmother's house at a cost of just 53 cents, about $13.13 today. This was significantly cheaper than sending her on a passenger train, with the train ticket in question costing $1.55, according to the book Mailing May. May's case helped push forward an inquiry on the matter of mailing children and ultimately led to Postmaster General Albert Burleson declaring that, from that point forward, forward, it was against the rules to mail human beings. Despite this, the practice continued for about 2 more years, finally stopping after an investigation into why 3-year-old Maud Smith of Missouri was allowed to be mailed to her grandparents' house in Kentucky. While you might have visions of children being put in boxes with holes on the side for air, this was not how the children were mailed. The appropriate number of stamps were simply affixed to their clothing, along with the address where they were to be sent. From there, they accompanied postal workers on the trains, along with normal packages, and then were escorted to their destinations. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.